What's going on, everybody? The original Mako back with some more Cult of the Lamb content, and today we have the first of more than likely quite a few tier lists for Cult of the Lamb. Today we're going to be talking about the curses or the spells in the game and going through the tier list for those. But before we get into that, be sure you check the links down below. As always, consider becoming a member on YouTube today. As you can see on screen, we got a list of our current members. There's 4 different tiers. They all come with different perks. And it is a really, really, really good way to help support the channel, and it makes a huge difference for me. So check that out. I would really appreciate it. Also, check the Twitch link out down below. We're doing a crazy challenge for Cult of the Lamb on stream right now. So come stop by. I might be streaming right as you're watching this. So come say hi. We've got a really fun community over there. Now, that being said, why are we wasting any more time? Let's just go ahead and start talking about these curses, baby. So I'm going to be going through them and reading a description of them because, once again, there's no description here, and not even I know these by just their picture, so that's how we're going to be doing it today. First up, we have the Touch of the Revenant. It tears open the earth and releases a horde of ghosts that targets nearby enemies. So it's very similar in how it looks to the tentacles here. It opens up a little line in the earth, ghosts pop out and target nearby enemies. This one for me is going to be, it's gonna be hypocritical if I put this in C because of something later. I'm still gonna put it into C though because listen, you don't have much control over what's happening here. There's going to be a huge line of ghosts that are probably going to be targeting a bunch of different enemies, so you're not going to get a lot of damage onto one enemy. You're just going to get some damage onto a lot of enemies, which is probably one of the least useful types of curses, is getting a lot of a little bit of damage onto a lot of enemies. I feel like being able to have a single target, higher damage spell is kind of the better way to go about things. It just seems like in this game, target priority is kind of a big deal. Being able to take out the correct target at the correct time, like the higher difficulty or higher danger targets first, is kind of the more important thing to do. So that's why I'm going to put this bad boy into C tier. Next up, we have Path of the Righteous. You hold to aim, and it is a projectile that creates a trail of black ichor. Black ick. So this one is going to go into B tier. This one creates a little bit of a line. You can aim it. You can hold to charge it, which means you slow down time for quite a while. And it covers a lot of ground. Like, it covers a lot of ground. So it does good damage, poisons enemies. It's not one of like the best things in the game. It's not overwhelmingly positive, like, woohoo, yeah, this is great. But it gets the job done, gets some poison damage off, and it's going to be super useful. Next up, we have Death's Attendant, a devastating melee attack that will also summon ghosts from slain enemies. This one is going to take another trip into the B tier here. I'm going to put it behind the top one just because it doesn't have a lasting effect. It doesn't cover quite as much space. It does cover a decent area in front of you, but I think overall the usefulness that you get from the dropped ick is better than the usefulness you get from landing a killing blow with this. For me personally, once again, this is my tier list. I usually use a curse to open up a fight, not to finish a fight. Doesn't happen every time, but a lot of the times that's what I tend to do. So I feel like having an effect that happens when you kill an enemy with the curse is not quite as useful for me. It just doesn't get the job done quite as well. So that's why I'm going to put it in B. I think it's still better than this because you have good control over what you're doing with it, but not quite as good as that other one. So next up, we have a blast, the Divine Blight is what it's called. Sorry. It knocks back and poisons enemies. So, yeah, there are a few of these. So here's what I'm thinking. This one's going to go in D. And here's why. The blasts cover the least amount of area. The enemies have to be already pretty close to you for it to work. And they don't do great damage, even to the enemies that are close to you. The biggest thing, I guess, is knockback and using these as a reactionary tool if you're about to take damage and you think you can get it off in time. That's not how I personally like to use curses. So for me, these are not very good and things that I'm going to pass up on almost every time. The added effect of poison is nice, but not enough for me to make it worth taking. Like if I have a choice, I'm not going to be using this throughout my run. So I'm going to put that into D tier. Some of you might disagree with that. That's fine. For my play style, using a curse as a reaction to getting ready to get hit is just not how I like to have a curse. That's not what I want to have a curse for. So that's why I'm going to put it into that D tier. Next up, Call of the Crown. Hold to aim, and it is a sacred projectile that will possess directly hit enemies. So every enemy that is directly hit will get possessed. It does decent damage, but doesn't get it into like A or S tier. This is... The hold to aim is nice. Once again, you can slow down time. Possessed enemies are that's not a great effect. I thought it was going to be a lot cooler when I originally unlocked it, but it's not. I've tested it multiple times, and it's just not great. It obviously takes enemies, they're not going to be trying necessarily to attack you, but it's just overall seems very undertuned. But the damage you get from this ability is still very solid. Once again, it is a sacred projectile. And since it has the hold to aim, you can slow down time for quite a while, which is why it's going to go into the top of the B tier. Next up, we have a Maelstrom. Tentacles will strike out in 4 directions. Bada bang, bada boom, baby. We got our first S tier, and let me tell you why. And I don't even know if I need to say anything more than this next sentence, but I will. Reason 1, hentai tentacles. That's it. That's all you need. But I'll explain more. This covers probably the most ground out of every spell in the entire game. It shoots out in 4 directions, which means you're covering 4 different parts of the map with these tentacles. They deal good damage, pretty high damage, considering how big of an area it affects, and can just easily get enemies off you, stun them, stop them from attacking. Just so many different uses for this, and is a great tool to use offensively, defensively, in any sort of scenario. And it is a beautiful tool, in my opinion, for getting the job done. Next up, we have the Touch of Tarua. I do not know how to pronounce that. But it is an eruption of ice pillars that freezes enemies on hit. This one, I haven't had a chance to use it a ton, only a few times, but I'm going to put it, we got a lot in the B tier right now. I'm going to put it at the top of B. So it doesn't do a ton of damage, but you have good control over it, and it does freeze, which I think freeze is one of the better side effects to a spell. So I'm going to put it in the top of B. If it did more damage, I think it would be in A or S. But I think the freeze effect is enough to get it to B tier, not quite push it into the A tier category. Next up, we have the Touch of Tarua, which is a miniature version of the Maelstrom, and I'm going to put it in A. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm about 90% sure this does more damage than the ice pillars. It obviously does not freeze, but I think the damage in most cases is going to be better for you than the freeze. So I'm going to put it into A tier. Once again, you have great control. It covers a good chunk of the map, even if it's only 1 tentacle instead of 4, and you deal a large chunk of damage with it. So that's why we're going to pop this bad boy up into the A tier. Next up, we have just the Ick Throw. You hold to aim, and it's a projectile that spreads black ick upon landing. This one is going to go top of C here. Now, the hold to aim almost puts it up, but it does not quite get it there. So this is basically just throwing a little poison bomb that will drop the poison on the ground. Enemies that walk into it are poisoned. If it hits an enemy directly, then boom, you're in a good shape. Sorry, I had to look at something. But it's not as good as this one because it doesn't leave a trail behind it, obviously. And the hold to aim is nice to slow down time, but the overall damage is just not great, and you're not covering even close to as much ground as something like this one. So I'm going to put it at the top of C. It just doesn't quite get to make that jump into B tier, in my humble opinion. Next up, we have Oath of the Crown, a devastating melee attack that also has a chance to possess impacted enemies. Once again, not a huge fan of the possess keyword. It does good damage and does decent knockback, but it's not great. I'll put it top of C. It's not as good as the other sweep curse that we've had so far, because this one can summon ghosts, which is much, much better than possessing an enemy, in my opinion. I will put it above this, though, the ick throw, just because this covers a slight bit more area, has good knockback on it, and can be used as a reactionary tool to, get enemies back off of you or projectiles away from you, as opposed to this, which can't really be used for that reason. So I'm going to put it into C tier. Next up, we have another sweep here, which is Death's Squall, a devastating melee attack that will also freeze hit enemies. Now, this one is a little bit different. This one's going to go into the bottom of A tier right now. Now, I just talked about the sweeps and them being, they cover decent area, not great, and it's still, enemies have to be kind of close to you, but this one does a really good chunk of damage, and it freezes enemies, which I think, like I said, is probably the best side effect from a spell. So that's why I'm going to put it at the bottom of A tier. Sorry, had to cough real quick. It does good damage. It freezes enemies. I think it's overall a great option to have, and I think it is for sure the best out of the sweeping, the slashes that you can get. So that's why I'm going to put it right there in A tier. Not as good as the hentai tentacles, but it gets the job done. Next up, we have the Divine Blast, which is just knocks back enemies in your range while also damaging them. This is but very bottom right now. Once again, it does the same thing as the poison one, except it doesn't poison. Enemies have to be super close to you. It doesn't do a ton of damage. Very, very reactionary. So it's going to be right into D tier. Next up, we have Divine Guardian. 2 seconds of invincibility. It deflects projectiles, causing damage to enemies that shot them. This one's going to go smack in between these two. If we're talking about using something as a reactionary defense tool, it does not get worse than this. So you might be thinking, why isn't this below? This one at least does some damage. If I'm going to have a spell that's purely defensive and I'm going to use it reactionary, I'd rather have this one that at least gives me 2 seconds where I just cannot be hit, and it deflects projectiles that'll cause damage to other enemies. It doesn't, having the poison I think is slightly better than this, but it's definitely, this is kind of on its own tier. If there was an F tier, I would put it into the F tier. It's definitely better than this, and probably could go, these could probably be interchanged in these first couple slots. So anyway, that's where I'm putting the Divine Guardian. Next up, we have Point of Corruption. You hold to aim, and it is an explosive projectile. This one is going to go right there. Right above the ick throw, because once again, this does a lot more damage and has a nice little area of effect to it, but it doesn't cover a ton of area, and it's once again something you can use to slow down time, but you cannot use it as like a reaction. You can't use it defensive if you want to. Everything else up here you can pretty much use defensively, except, this one, not really, but you can at least poison enemies right in front of you and cover more ground. This one is just much more precise, but it does decent damage, which is why it's going to go above the ick throw, just for the damage output that you do actually get from it. Next up, we have Strike of the Crown. Shoots a fierce projectile that has a chance to possess enemies on hit. This one is going to go to the top of the B tier here. So it's similar to this one, except you don't have to hold, aim, and like lob it to somewhere on the map. You just shoot a projectile right out in front of you, which can knock back enemies. It can be used as a reaction. The chance to possess enemies on hit isn't great, but this does really, really good damage. As it says, it shoots a fierce projectile, which makes a big difference in the damage output. So that's why we're going to get this in the top of B tier, because it does do a really, really good chunk of damage. Next up, we have Divine Blizzard. Knocks back and freezes enemies, and boy, would you know it, psych. I'm going to put this into C. I think this one deserves to be on the next tier up. Does not deserve to jump any of these on C tier, but it is a notch above these other ones because, once again, it freezes enemies, which I think is the best of the side effects. It gives you a good window to do some damage. One of the better uses for a reactionary curse. And that's why I'm going to jump it into C tier. I think it deserves to be on that next little slot ahead. Next up, we have Death's Sweep, a devastating melee attack that can be charged for increased power. So another one that can charge, slow down time. It does okay damage. It's not the craziest thing in the world. It can be used to knock back enemies. It can be used to knock back projectiles. It can be used to hit enemies for a good chunk of damage. Not crazy, but a good chunk. And I think it's overall fairly decent. So I'm gonna put it at B tier, and I actually just realized if I'm going to be putting that there, then this sweep needs to go up, because I believe the Death's Attendant does the same amount of damage, but it also has a chance to summon ghosts, so we're just going to move that up to this spot here. I think as I've been thinking about the slashes, I've now been seeing in my head kind of how big of a range they have. Bigger than it covers a good 180 degrees in front of your character. So I'm gonna move that up. I think these are still justified at the B tier, but I'm gonna give that one a little more credit where credit is due. Next up, we have Hounds of Fate. Shoots multiple projectiles that seek out enemies. Now, get ready for a little bit of me being hypocritical, baby. This is going into S tier. Why the heck is this going into S tier when the other one that seeked out enemies is down in C tier? Listen, everybody has their own preferences to how things work. This seeking projectile is much more confined to an area like right in front of you. So if you're going through a room and you're like, okay, I see the big threat here. I need to kill this threat first. And you get close to it and use this spell, all of the seeking projectiles are going to hit that enemy. Whereas if you use this one, you use that, and then maybe one, maybe two, if you're lucky, projectiles will hit that enemy. This one, however, it just feels like you have so much more control, and it is the best spell in the game. Why? Not for normal rooms, but for bosses. Assuming the boss isn't one that spams ads, which there are a couple that do, but if it's not a boss that spams ads, then chances are, if you've cleared the small amount of ads that there are, it's just you and the boss in the room together. And if you use this, the projectiles are going to seek out that boss, and every single projectile will hit for the highest single damage spell in the game. If every projectile from this hits, it does more damage than any other spell that you can use. It hits like a truck, and you can be as far away from this boss as you want and be in no danger at all. You don't have to aim. Well, you kind of want to throw it in the right direction, so you kind of have to aim, but not really, and you're in no danger of getting hit. It is super efficient, super great, and I think overall just a huge positive thing for like just the best spell in the game. If you see this, you're in shape. You're probably not going to want to switch it out for just about anything else in the game. Next up, we have Cleansing Fire. Shoots three fireball projectiles right in front of you. This one's going to go A. Once again, if all of these projectiles hit one enemy, it does a good chunk of damage. It does, actually, because there's 3, I lied. I'm going to put it at the top of A. 3 projectiles. It doesn't cover a huge area, but the damage output that you can get and the control that you have is pretty nice. They do spread out pretty far, so they do have a pretty wide spread, which makes it a little bit harder to control. So the more I'm thinking about it, I'm just going to keep moving it around. So we're going to put it in the middle. But the damage output's great, and you can use this offensive. You can use it somewhat reactionary as well, and you have decent control over where these projectiles are going to go. Next, and finally, last but not least, we have the Flaming Shot. Shoots a piercing bolt of fire. Hold and release it at the mark to make it explosive. So if you release it at the right time, it'll explode, which is the only spell in the game that has a little added effect if you time it correctly. This one's going to be kind of tough to rate for me. It could very easily go right here. It could also go here. And maybe there's an argument that it could go here. Okay, I'm going to put it at the bottom of A tier, and here's why. Okay, hear me out. If you release it at the right time and make it explosive, the damage output is phenomenal. It's super useful, super precise, and gets a little bit of nice AoE at the end with the explosion. If you're doing that every time, it's definitely going to have more use than this Strike of the Crown that can possess enemies. And it'll even have more damage output than this, which is pretty crazy because this has a good chunk of damage. But this one, if you use it at the right time and release it correctly, use it, boom, bang, bop, you're going to be in great shape. And I think it deserves that spot in A tier. Does not deserve to jump anything that is in A tier, but I think still, even for such a simple spell, knowing how to use it and release it at the right time makes it an A tier candidate, in my opinion. So there we have it, everybody. Honestly, a relatively symmetrical tier list. I think it's pretty good when you have most, the highest category is B. And then we have 6 spells that are above, and we have, 8 that are below, which isn't too bad. And honestly, some of these you guys would probably like more. I just can't with these blasts. I just don't like them at all. This one is probably the big one that people will be upset about. This one, with its damage output, it could be higher. I just don't feel like I ever have control when I'm using it. But regardless, this is it for my tier list. Let me know your thoughts down below. As always, I love to hear what you guys have to say. And I can't wait to hear how wrong I am. But thank you guys for watching. Check out those links down below. Think about becoming a member. Hop over to the Twitch channel and drop a follow. Thank you guys so much for the support. As always, have a wonderful rest of your day. I love each and every one of your faces, and I will catch you all in the next video.